everyone, and welcome to another quarter here at Rasmussen. This quarter and this course is built to help you gain knowledge on specific areas of the medical world and the structures of those systems and those areas that are included. I will use these weekly videos to help you contain the information and gain the information since we don't meet in person. For week 1, we are going to be focusing on the pulmonary or respiratory system, and we're going to have 3 chapters that we're looking at. Chapter 29, pages 640 to 647, Chapter 51, pages 1198 to 1210, and Chapter 54, pages 1271 and 1272. So let's go ahead and break those down and look at each of those chapters individually. We're going to start with Chapter 29. So this chapter is really going to start our discussion on the respiratory system. So the first thing that's really important for us to discuss when we talk about the pulmonary unit and system is the organs that are part of that. So you have the organs of the nose, perineal sinuses, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoles, and the lungs. So let's start with the nose. So the nose is the organ of smell, and it's an important component of the respiratory system. Your nose has 4 functions outside of smell, which are they serve as a passageway for air, it warms and moistens the inhaled air, it traps dust, pollen, and other foreign objects in the cilia, or hair-like projections inside of the nose, and it assists in making the sounds for speaking and singing. The perineal sinuses are air cavities in the cranial bones near the nose, and there are 4 different pairs of sinus cavities. You have the maxillary sinuses over the cheekbone, the front sinuses over the eyebrows, the sinuses between and behind the eyes, and we have another set behind those. Your pharynx is the next organ, and that is a tube that lies behind and connects to the nose, mouth, and larynx. It's about 5 inches long and consists of muscle membranes, and its major function is a passageway for food to the esophagus and air to the larynx and trachea. But your pharynx also plays a big role in speech and performing and forming specific sounds. Your larynx is next, and that is also known as your voice box. It's a muscular structure that is lined with mucous membranes. The larynx can be found at the end of your pharynx. And then we have your trachea. Now tracheas are also known as your windpipe. Tracheas are made up of cartilage that is about 1 inch wide and 4.5 inches long. The trachea serves as an open passageway so that air can reach the lungs. The bronchi are 2 small branches that come from the trachea and extend into the lungs. Their job is a passageway for air from the trachea to the lungs. The bronchioles are tiny structures that are composed of thin layers of epithelial and smooth muscle. These are only about 1 millimeter wide, and they can be found at the end of the bronchi. They almost look like leaves on a tree. Alveoles are the small air sacs that act as a support network for your capillaries. They exchange the oxygen and carbon dioxide that take place when you're breathing. And the last and the largest part is definitely your lungs. They are the large cone-shaped organs found in the chest. Your lungs are porous and spongy in texture, and they have a high elasticity, so that way they can inhale out and exhale in. You have 2 sets of lungs. You have your right lung and your left lung. Now your right lung is made up of 3 lobes, where your left lung is only made up of 2 lobes, because the left lung area also accommodates the heart. In reality, most lungs are about 10 to 12 inches in length. So now that we understand kind of the respiratory system and the organs associated with it, we're going to talk about breathing, the actual process of breathing. So breathing is the movement of air to and from the lungs. That process is called ventilation. Ventilation is made up of one inhalation and one exhalation. Inhalation is the active process that involves taking in a breath, also called an inspiration. Exhalation is the passive process of exhaling or breathing out a breath, called expiration. Now, if a patient's having difficulty breathing, it's called dyspnea. That means painful breathing. If a patient has a lack of or absence of breathing for more than 19 seconds, that's called apnea. And if a patient's having breathing difficulties in certain positions, that is called orthopnea. All right, so that's kind of chapter 29 for you. Let's move to chapter 51. So chapter 51 is talking about pulmonology, being the study of certain diseases and treatments for those of the respiratory system. As we just talked about, it includes the trachea, bronchial tubes, lung, and alveoli. So the primary function of the respiratory system, as we talked about, is to transport oxygen from the lungs through the bloodstream to all the cells in your body and carry out waste products from those cells to the bloodstream to the lungs to be exhaled. As a medical assistant, it will be important for you to know how to help your providers and diagnose conditions or diseases of your lungs. This can be done through several different options, but some of the most common disorders that we're going to talk about could be things such as pneumonia, tuberculosis, it could be lung cancer, it could be flu, it could be any of those things that you hear about. So one of the ways that we can diagnose a patient is with a pulmonary function test, or a PFT. One of the most common ones that you'll hear of is called the spirometry test. Spirometry test is a non-invasive test that measures the ability of your lungs to exhale. The results reflect the elasticity of your lungs and their ability to ventilate and strengthen the respiratory muscles. As a medical assistant, when you're performing these jobs, what you want to do is you want to be the coach for the patient. You want to encourage them and cheer them on during this procedure because it does contain and it does get very hard for our patients to perform these. Another way that you can diagnose a patient with some respiratory issues is through arterial blood gases. This measures the amount of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and the pH of your blood. It's used to help diagnose patients with COPD and pneumonia. Quite often, medical assistants are not going to be responsible for drawing these blood tests as they are pretty specialized and you have to draw from an artery. But it's important that you know where those blood tests are done and what the normal levels are. You're also going to be responsible for oxygen saturations, which is going to be looking at the oxygen concentration in your blood. The normal percentage for an oxygen saturation is 95 to 100%. And what's really important is that when you are going to be doing a pulse ox on a patient, you're going to be using their fingertip for the most part. So you need to make sure that it is warm to the touch and it does not contain any fingernail polish. If it does, you need to remove the fingernail polish, and if it's cold, you need to warm the finger up. If we can't use a fingertip, you could also use an earlobe or a patient's toe. You could also be responsible for doing some TB testing. So if you remember back in fundamentals, you learned how to perform those tests. But what TB really is it's a characteristic disease caused by coughing up blood. Generally, you get this when you have gone out of the country for long periods of time and gone to places where those diseases are prominent. Peak flow meters are generally done on our patients who are asthma patients. It's their ability to move air into and out of their lungs. And you administer this by having the patient take in one deep breath and blow out as hard and as fast as they can. And you do that over 3 times. And then you take the average amount that a person can blow out, and that is what you record as their peak flow meter. This is really, like I said, how we control our asthma patients. All right, so that's kind of the end for chapter 51. So the last thing that we have to talk about is chapter 54, which is dealing with different ways that we help to treat patients who do have pulmonary disorders. One of the 2 main ways is that we can use nebulizers or inhalers. These are generally containing aerosol sprays, bronchodilators, or they are turning a liquid medication into an aerosol. So nebulizers will turn that liquid into an aerosol and make it easy for the patients to breathe in. We generally do this if a patient's having a very difficult time breathing and they can't catch their breath, or if they have a pulse ox number of less than 95%. Inhalers are generally handheld devices that patients can take with them when they're in need. They will take a deep breath in and push the medicine into their mouth, and then what they will do is they will breathe that into their lungs and hold their breath to allow the medication to work into their lungs. Generally, inhalers do have some sort of steroid in them, so patients will feel very shaky after the fact. Patients can also be given what we call a spacer for inhalers, and what that does is it will dispense the medication into the spacer, and the patient can breathe that in their own time. These are just some of the common disorders that you could see with the respiratory system. You can read about them in your book, but here's just kind of a good breakdown of them. And just some more here for you. Legionnaire's disease is not as common anymore, but it is something that I think is important for you guys to know about. And some of the normal medications that we would use: antihistamines, anti-inflammatories, antitussives, bronchodilators, decongestants, and immunosuppressants. All right, so that's kind of all I have for you this week, guys. I'm going to stop the video here. Please make sure that you are reading your readings on your own. While I go over a lot in the videos, it's sometimes just not enough, and sometimes your quiz will touch on things that I have not talked about. For your discussion board this week, we're discussing the spirometry preparation and the coaching method that you as a medical assistant will take. What you will need to write in your discussion is what you think the proper way to prepare a patient is when they need to perform a spirometry test. You will need to explain also what you think the purpose and importance of coaching the patient through the test are. Please make sure that your initial discussion post is completed Tuesday at midnight, and that you will need to have at least 1 reply post to your classmates Saturday by midnight. There is a grading rubric that is available on your discussion board, so you can see how I will grade you. And if you follow that and answer the topic questions fully, you should have no problem receiving the full credit. Also this week, you will have your first quiz. Your first quiz will be over the chapters discussed this week in your lecture, as well as your lab classes. So chapter 29, chapter 51, and chapter 54. This is an online quiz, and it will consist of 16 multiple choice questions, or true or false questions, and 3 short answer essay questions. You will need to make sure this is completed Sunday by midnight. If you have any questions, I'm also going to put up this PowerPoint so you guys can download it and have it for your review. Have a wonderful week, guys. Don't be afraid to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. And welcome back to Rasmussen. Have a wonderful quarter, guys.